Welcome to Eight Limbs. This evening, I'm speaking with one of my favorite advocates out there, protecting dogs and getting proper information out to people. Karen Batchelor, the president of the American Pit Bull Terrier Association of New Zealand. Welcome to Eight Limbs. How are you this evening?
I'm well, thank you, Drayton, and you?
I'm doing well, thanks. One of the reasons why I wanted to speak with you is we've had lots of conversations over the years through email and through Facebook, and you're a stalwart. You really just keep going and trying and educating, and I really appreciate your efforts. A lot of people don't realize that pit bull advocacy and pit bull prejudice, that's something that happens all around the world, not just in America. So tell us, how did you get started doing advocacy for pit bull dogs?
Well, I tripped over a pit bull quite by accident. I was looking for another dog, and this one turned up in the newspaper, and I'd actually come across a video that had pit bulls on it, and I was very surprised to see what jolly handsome creatures they are, and I saw them at parks and playing with children and all the rest of it, and just being dogs generally. So I saw this dog in the paper, and I decided that I'd give her a go. And she was from a fighting out, as it happened, and she turned up terribly emaciated, the usual thing, abused and all that kind of stuff. And once she got a bit of weight on her and became a dog again, I realised that outside of the pit, these poor little guys are just dogs, and the media and politicians either have it badly wrong or something else is going on.
Well, that's for sure. There's definitely something else going on aside from the politicians and the media. That's great. I'm so glad that happened to you because, as I said at the top, you really. I talk to a lot of pit bull advocates, and I do a lot of mentoring and helping and rah-rahing and giving information. And you're really. It's the dogs are lucky to have you in New Zealand, that's for sure. And as we know, and we'll talk about, it's not just pit bull type dogs. It's a lot of dogs. So when did New Zealand start these restrictions on certain types of dogs?
Well, they kicked it off in 1996 with the Dog Control Act 1996, and that was the introduction of the infamous Schedule 4, which banned the importing and export of certain breeds in any form, including semen, eggs, etc. And they also allowed a provision to ban other breeds, but to do so they are required to consult with local government, animal welfare organisations, dog clubs and veterinary practices, as appropriate, they say. But as you can see in the YouTube footage of that latest politician intensifying breedism in New Zealand, although they do indeed consult the aforementioned organisations and professionals, they ignore their advice and continue on with BSL, breed-specific legislation, which is very sad considering the amount of evidence out there against it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of math and science that backs up our cause, which is, dogs are not a problem. The problem is people, and the problem is the media inflating things. It's sad that it's gotten to this point because there are so many more sober, smart, intelligent, informed, experienced voices saying, "Hey, this is really a waste of time and money and energy." So. It holds on, I think, just due to sheer ignorance, and it really does at this point. It really does show the character of a human being if you're broad stroking certain kinds of dogs and just saying they're all bad and they're killers. It just shows your level of intelligence is pretty low.
When you're talking politicians, they're only interested in garnering votes, and if they don't deserve them, that doesn't matter to them. And the media are only interested in selling copy and boosting ratings and clickbait. And if ever there was a fine example of fake news, it's what the media have done to the pit bull dogs and other breeds that they've levelled their guns at. If ever there was a determined and deliberate effort not to understand the truth, then you've got to give this top billing, surely.
Well, I recently just saw it was literally I hit record, so I have it on, I have it on my DVR, but it is literally a 5-second spot on the morning news. Somebody must have had like a security camera, so they caught it, and they show this black, we'll just say pit bull looking type dog, because I couldn't get a real good read on the dog, because it was kind of blurry and quick. And it ran out of someone's yard or house, and it jumped on a kid, and the kid fell. I guess he got hurt, but it was literally why is this on the news? And so I was on this station So I, sent them a message via Facebook, and I was like, guys, come on, there's a criteria for this. And if that kid was bitten by that dog, and, there's a human criteria here. Why was the dog running loose? It's like so at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. And what makes it sad is that this isn't just an intrinsic problem in America. It's all over the world. And I mean,
it's global, no doubt.
Yeah. So since these regulations for certain types of dogs have been in place, and has there been a decrease in dog bites or incidents that could be considered lethal or fatal?
No, there have not, in fact, but, we've had a total of 10 dog bite-related fatalities in the history of New Zealand, or the settled history of New Zealand. And, in fact, according to the media and the politicians and our Accident Compensation Corporation, we've had a massive increase in dog bites. So one wonders, why do we have Schedule 4? Why do we have breed-specific legislation? If it's making no difference, and, in fact, if things, according to you folk, are getting worse, then why are we going breedist? Why aren't we having a good look at the backstory, like that dog who's rushed out and, jumped on that kid and so on? So why is that dog loose? And, how is that dog being kept? How is that dog trained and raised and treated and so on? Why have we got Schedule 4? Because we know that it's not breed-specific. Everybody knows that by now. When the White House comes out and says that breed-specific legislation is a bad idea, then everybody knows we've passed tipping point.
And the CDC... and the American Veterinary Society, or the American Veterinary Association, rather, I was
American Animal Hospital Association, the National Animal Control Association.
Yeah.
Even the American Bar Association's weighed in. So, weighed in rather. So we all know this is wrong. So, why, for example, is New Zealand still donkey deep in the Dark Ages? What's wrong with these people, and how are they getting away with it?
Well, it's America, it's England, it's anywhere where there are people who, and I mean, now that, information is at the ready and people can make an informed choice, and, pit bull advocacy and dog advocacy is not something that is on the fringes of dog clubs and backyards. I mean, it's front and center. And it really is, as my friend Deirdre Franklin of Pinups for Pit Bulls said quite a few years ago, it's just not cool to bully anymore. Dogs, people, kids, women, gays. It's not cool to bully someone or something that cannot have freedom as what they are. Now, the big argument that persists in America is these dogs, when they bite or they do this, and so if we strip away all the emotion and we just look at it as behavior, because that's really what it is, and that's what I brought into the pit bull advocacy game, is behavior and training. And when you look at things in a behavior context, behavior's in the environment, not in the dog, and humans are the variable. Period. And that comes from whether it's Dr. Robert Sapolsky or Dr. Susan Friedman or Dr. Karen Overall, people with letters after their names who don't have an agenda. They're simply saying, here's how behavior works. And if behavior's in the environment, not in the dog, and humans are the variable, and there's always a human criteria in every dog bite, but in the really bad, lethal, and fatal ones, then I think the phrase you said was donkey deep. It's like, people are just not smart about this. It wastes money, it wastes time, it rips up families. It's bad across the board. So, by all means.
Well, sadly, common sense ain't that common, and this is our biggest problem, and that is how dangerous the media actually are. How easily they can manipulate the public psyche and make fools of people. I mean, I had a neighbour go by my place one day, and he muttered something about every other dog in this country is a pit bull. And I said to him, no, where did you get that idea from? I've actually got the registry. Come and have a look. I'll show you. Well, he didn't want to know about that. But he said, they should all be wiped out. These are really dangerous dogs. And I said, hang on a second. You've lived next door to me now for over 12 years. And with all the dogs I've had here and all that time, you've never had an incident. You've never had anything to worry about. They've never bothered anybody. And he muttered, I know what I see on the news. And he stomped off. And I thought, well, there it is, And this is a guy in his 60s. He was a Canadian, actually. Not that that has anything to do with it, of course. But, he's allowing the media propaganda to trump the evidence of his own eyes and his own personal experience. And there it is. And that's how dangerous it is.
Yeah, and therein lies the problem, is that when people buy into an ideology, a religion, a political party, a certain mindset, whether it's racism, sexism, like whatever that thing is that people lock into, I'm honestly not concerned about those people. And here's why. you can't sell somebody something that they don't want to buy. So, in America anyway, I've figured that it breaks down into these subsets. You've got people who love dogs, all dogs, and they know dogs are great and magic and special and innocent and they need to be treated well. That's the top of the heap. Then you've got people who love dogs, but some dogs not as much. So they may love their golden retrievers, but they absolutely cannot stand pit bulls or Rottweilers or whatever their bias is. Then you've got people who are completely indifferent. I don't know. Dogs aren't part of my world. Okay. And then you've got the dog haters. And so those people who hate dogs, I don't care about them. My goal is to get to those people who love dogs but have biases against other kinds of dogs that they have deemed to be whatever they are. They're the first priority because they already have a dog or love dogs. Then the people who are indifferent, what's interesting about educating them is that if you really know how to speak to them and educate and make a connection, you can have them at least understand, oh yeah, wow, so there is something behind this other than what the media says or what people who've told me. So you can bring those people along, at least have them part of culture. But, the dog haters and these, because honestly, there isn't one single person that I've ever heard talk that's a dog hater or a pit bull hater that I'm worried about intellectually, or I don't feel like, oh my God, they have so much emotional EQ that I'm going to be daunted if I had to. They have the collective intelligence of like a stoned 7th grader. I mean, let's get right down to it. We're not dealing with people who really have anything other than hate and bias. And like you say, they're probably just, reading, the media and watching the media and that's feeds their bias.
But on the other hand, we do have these people that are plainly highly intelligent people. My GP for a start, I mean, that guy's so smart, he's scary. But he's utterly anti pit bull dogs, and you just can't discuss it with him. He's just his mindset in concrete. The media have told him what he has to think, and he's thinking it.
But then he's not that smart, though. But then he's not that smart. So what I would say is, if you don't understand behavior, okay, regardless of where you fall on the issue of dogs, if you don't understand behavior, you shouldn't say anything about dogs. And that's for people who have dogs and love them, because to me, the biggest problem, because we can go back and forth all day long with, the money aspect. The bottom line is its behavior. And this is what I've said to people for years. The dog haters and the dog lovers want the same thing. They want dogs in the hands of people who are going to keep the dogs safe, keep their community safe, etc. That's what everyone wants, because dogs aren't going anywhere. As a matter of fact, Dr. Karen Overall and a few other people have hypothesized that dogs probably co-evolved with humans at the same time, because we wouldn't really be here or had gotten here as quick if we didn't have dogs. They provided heat and warmth, hunting, and protection. And that's how we got here because, let's face it, we didn't have electricity and things and running water for a long time as we were developing as a species. So, the bottom line is like, everybody owes dogs. Every single person on this planet owes dogs a debt of gratitude because they co-evolved with us. They were helping humans 20,000 years before agriculture. So before we were putting, seeds in the ground, dogs were helping us survive, and they were working and living with humans. And, the bottom line is that they're here to stay. So that's what I would tell the dog haters. Get used to it, get educated. Somebody who has blind hate or prejudice or whatever, you might be really good on your A levels in your college and blah, blah, blah. And maybe you're good at your job, but you're not that smart. I've met people who pretend to be smart because they know a bunch of stuff, but they're really not that smart. So I wouldn't give those people too much credit.
Yeah, trouble is that, when there are a majority of people voting in a politician who is enacting a policy that is wrong, then you do have to look at them and think about just how do we go about this to
you circumvent them.
Put the brakes on this.
You circumvent them. I have the answer to how all dog prejudice can be wiped out within the next 10 to 15 years. And we need a massive educational front by smart, intelligent, caring people who have experience with dogs and behavior. Whether you are a PhD, a dog trainer, a person who just figured it all out and you're smart and you're eloquent and you can speak to people, that's what we need. We need an empathy army to educate at every step. I give you a lot of credit because I know what it's like to have to deal with politicians and media and nasty neighbors. And I know every gamut of the game in pit bull advocacy. And I give you a lot of credit for sticking it out, and especially having that conversation with your neighbor. I think there's nothing worse than somebody who says, well, I'm a pit bull advocate or I have pit bulls. And when they have that moment with a neighbor or somebody on a walk or they're at a party and they don't engage them and they don't educate, go sit down. You have no business representing and protecting these dogs, especially if you know. Like if you don't know and you're just like, look, I just love pit bulls and I'm sorry, but I can't. Okay, fine, no problem. You're doing the right thing. But if you really know and you've got info and you have skills to speak with people and you're not doing it, you're really remiss. So I give you a lot of credit, because I've seen a lot of advocates come and go, and I've seen some come and hang around and not really do much, and still talk about it like they are. And I give you a lot of credit. I really do.
Oh, thank you for that. But giving up isn't an option, obviously. So you just have to keep on keeping on and find a new modus operandi. If that one doesn't work, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So,
but doing the same thing by educating people in your travels or in your community is not insane. It's the same reason why kids will be going to school of some kind forever, because they have to learn math and reading and so forth. And even if they have struggles, people aren't going to give up. And you say you don't have any other options, but that's because you have the drive and the will and whatever it takes. I think one of the larger questions and one of the larger discussions that needs to happen is, are people really advocating for pit bulls? Do they really have the skills? I mean, let's take a look at our team. Like I said, there are a lot of people I see talking and they're not really doing anything. And that's a problem. And like you said, politicians have an agenda. They are smart to a degree, whatever their smarts are. But, if we're lazy and we're not doing our job as advocates, and I mean the collective we, not you and I, then we don't have anything to really complain about. Like, you can feel bad, but what are you doing to educate your community? What are you doing to in today's day and age with the internet? If you call yourself a pit bull advocate and you're not out there really like blasting out information on a regular basis for the world to consume, don't talk to me about it. Do something, because I'm tired of people talking, and I talk a lot, but I also educate every step of the way. Every opportunity I get, that's what I do. I'm really curious to know about the culture of dog training in other places, and New Zealand obviously is another place other than where I'm at.
I was just going to say, luckily these days dog training is certainly taking a turn for the better.
Nice.
And it's a bit lawless in New Zealand. Pretty much anybody can hang out their shingle and call themselves a dog trainer.
Same here.
And yeah, is it? Oh, okay, you're right.
Oh,
okay.
America's the Wild West when it comes to dog training. I think everywhere. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you've been following, but there's definitely been some discussions here in America about licensing for dog trainers through the state, which I'm completely against.
Oh, me too. You want credentialed trainers. You don't want licensed trainers. Anybody can get a license, and politicians are they're money-centric, so they're going to be looking at what they can get off it. They lack the professional knowledge needed to ensure best practice and the gold standard, so they're the last people we want involved.
Oh, my God, you are brilliant.
There are courses available in New Zealand.
You're dead on. I love you. I said you're brilliant. You're dead on. You just summed up the entire argument that, all of us who are against licensure have been saying. Like, we need people to be educated, so mandate education. But then the problem with mandating education, so it's like, okay, if the state sends me a letter and says, your tax form says you're a dog trainer, behavior consultant, we need to see your certification, Okay, fine. I went to the Academy for Dog Trainers. I did an 8-week course with Dr. Susan Friedman. But I also did a lot of grad work by interviewing people and so forth, right? But anyway, I have certification, so I'm fine. But the problem is the same, can be said for somebody who sends in a certification and they were trained at a dog training school who taught them how to use a shock collar or a prong collar, or taught them that dogs have a moral imperative to dominate you, when that's absolutely false. So that's the problem that I have, is whether it's licensure or mandatory education, the education system isn't correct. So either way, if the government's involved, it's just going to give legitimacy to people who are causing dogs fear and pain to train them. And, we know that you...
Yeah, well,
Yeah, so...
An analogy is, I mean, you can go and get a driver's license and you can have the best, driving teacher that money can buy, but it's not going to stop you being a bad driver if you decide to get behind that wheel drunk. And you can get your license to be a dog trainer, but you may like prong collars and other instruments of torture and dominance training and, physical punishments and punishers, etc. Who's going to stop you?
So,
whereas
right.
If you,
so that's what needs to happen. So the answer is there needs to be a statute in the cruelty laws, because see, where we win on this is consumer protection. And that's where you can sell it to politicians and say, look, these dogs are getting choked and shocked. I just got an email from a former client who's trying to get a coworker to get some help for his dog. Sent the dog away to a boot camp. And he's using a shock collar, and the dog's lunging and biting people. And, I had to write this person an email and explain, like, there's no magic fix to this. Here's how behavior works, so it's a huge thing to really understand how to be a good behavior consultant, a good dog trainer, et cetera, et cetera. Do it in a way where you can ensure people that this best practices, these are safe. And that's the sell to everybody is the consumer. You want safe dogs? Well, don't shock them and kick them and choke them and pin them down and jab at them. So, it can all be summed up by there's a huge lack of education. Yeah. I mean, we do have institutions in New Zealand, Unitec, for example, which is offering a course for people to become dog trainers. But when I phoned and asked questions about the course, the one very important question I did ask was, how are these, quote, specialist dog trainers, end quote, actually qualified to teach the subject? And they couldn't tell me. So who are these people and who trained them? Right, that's very true.
And,
very true.
If I'm going to pay, if I'm going to pay around $7,000 to sit your course, I want to know that I've got something worth having at the other end, and it's about $20,000 for overseas students to come and take the course. So, this is not small change. But you really want to know who's doing the training and where they got their training, and what are you going to actually learn?
Well, there's a lot of charlatans in the dog world, and there's a lot of scam artists because they know that they can always say, well, behavior's unpredictable. Anyway, see ya, right? So they can use that out, which is no, behavior is not unpredictable. What's unpredictable is the environment. Behavior is actually incredibly predictable if you understand.
Absolutely.
If you understand dogs and behavior and Pavlovian conditioning and Skinnerian conditioning, and you actually know how to train a dog by rewarding them and giving them kind consequences and not scaring them or hurting them, then things get real predictable. See, I was at the, I was fortunately, when I got into dogs, I didn't know anything. I had no baggage. I was an open book, and I was fortunately guided in the proper direction. So a lot of people come into dogs with baggage, from their parents, from culture. I mean, you go to Spain or you go to, you go to any country, go to Korea, they don't really give a shit about dogs. They really don't. Like, America.
Oh, they do. They taste good, Grayson.
Right. Yeah, people. I know. But, and people in America who have dogs, like it's bad here in some ways, but America is like the golden land for dogs. America loves dogs, and there's 77 million registered dogs in America. There's a $60 billion with a B $billion commerce in America for the pet care industry, and I would imagine dogs are probably the biggest part of the pie, and then cats. So I mean, there's a financial component, there's a animal welfare component, there's a consumer protection component, and what it's really going to take, and I'm working towards this every day, is getting a politician who really loves dogs and gets it and says, you know what, we're going to put a provision into the cruelty laws that you can't do these sorts of things with companion dogs. So if you want to go use a shock collar with your hunting dog, which I wouldn't advise either, or if you want to put a prong collar on a police dog, which I wouldn't advise either, okay. But when you go to mom and dad with the 2 kids and the dog, and you're in the living room or they come to your facility, you can't choke, shock, hit, kick, scare, or unnecessarily cause this dog duress. And once that happens...
Or shrug your shoulders when you get it wrong and wreck that dog and say, hey, caveat emptor.
No, you can't wreck the dog. See, that's the thing. When you have the statute and the cruelty laws, and it gets put down in writing from on high, then you won't be able to go to someone's house, because then you'll be held liable, because it's in the statute of cruelty that you can't do this in the context. So if somebody says, hey, I got a gun dog, can you come train him with a shock collar? Okay, there's your loophole. Because I'm not romantic or wide-eyed about this. I know shock collars and prong collars aren't going to go away. I know that. But what I'm saying is you shouldn't subject any dog to them, but especially some unsuspecting person or family with a dog, and all you got is, I'm going to crack this dog's neck, and if he doesn't comply, like you said, oh well, right? Or I'm going to keep turning the shock collar up, oh well. Or I'm going to keep throwing him on his back and jabbing at him, and if it doesn't work, oh well. You know, that's unconscionable on so many levels, and it's just bullying, and you're just ripping people off. It's sad that it even exists. You know, it's the 21st century. You'd think that the human race would have elevated a little bit more. You know what I mean? Just a little bit.
Well, there's still a lot of knuckle-dragging cave people out there who still think that force and fear is the only way. We know otherwise, and consequently we still have these instruments of torture being used on dogs, and it's completely unnecessary. I mean, I see people, saying, oh, my dog won't work in hand. He drags me all around the neighborhood, and it's like, why?
Learn.
You haven't taught your dog to work in hand. I mean, Christ, if you had a horse like that, you'd be totally buggered.
Yeah, you might be dead too. Because horses are big.
Yeah. And if you know how to train your horse, you should be able to ride him without anything on his head at all. And the same goes to your dog. Not that I would recommend taking your dog out on the street without an adequate restraint to keep him out from under the cars. That's an interesting question that gets raised, because you had mentioned that the dog bites in New Zealand have actually increased, and I was curious to ask, what's the leash laws like? Like, are people really loose? Do they just have their dogs walking loose without a leash? How much is that enforced? Enforcement is sadly lacking, as always. Nothing gets done until something bad happens. And I often see people walking their dogs off-leash. I used to do that once myself when I was young and silly. I would never do it today, of course. It's too easy for something bad to happen. But enforcement's very poor, and education's just non-existent, really. It's kind of ambulance at the bottom of the cliff stuff. If a dog gets out and, bites the neighbour's kid or kills the neighbour's cat, well, animal control comes along and applies the fines and, the punishes at the end of the day, rather than making sure people understand that this can happen, and that's why we have leash laws and containment laws and all the rest of it.
Because in New York City in the 70s, when they finally mandated the leash law, which is kind of crazy considering that, New York was a pretty jumping place in the 50s and the 60s to have dogs running loose.
Yeah.
But they were. And I guess from what I remember from this presentation, the gentleman said that when they instituted the mandatory leash law in New York City, that dog bites decreased like 75% in the first year. And then it just exponentially went down simply by having dogs on leash. So,
the simple reason is that dogs will be dogs when given the freedom to be so.
Right.
And if they're not free to offend, then they can't offend.
Right. And
it's not rocket science.
And the other thing is that, dogs are innocent. They're responding to their environment in a safe, unsafe, neutral paradigm. That's how they view stimulus. And, if they're contained on a leash and someone's holding them, that's at least one more line of defense should things start to go a little haywire, that at least the person can hold on to their dog, Well, Karen, I thank you so much for speaking with us on Eight Limbs. It's great to get the perspective from somebody as smart and passionate and dedicated as you about what's going on in New Zealand. I know that it's nice for us to hear that, it isn't just here, even though I wish you were saying that, oh yeah, everything's rosy here for dogs. Everybody uses positive training and pit bulls are, paraded around as gods. But sadly, that's not the case. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on Eight Limbs. Take care of yourselves. And remember, if you want positive results, use positive training. And if you're going to advocate for dogs, use math and science and common sense. Thanks for listening.